Yo. It is us. By us, I mean the guys. By the guys, I mean the one and onlys. By the one and onlys, I mean Play It First Podcast, man.
Play it
Episode
first,
3.
baby.
Back again, doing what we do, what we always do. No, I'm just playing. But it's the Play It First Podcast, man. Thank you guys for joining us again. One more time as we, you know, take you guys through the stars and the moon and just taking you guys through the practicality of game development and game design and just gaming in general, and kind of giving you that backstory, that insider scoop, that insight into why certain decisions are made in the first place, and helping you make better buys as a consumer, right? And inspiring devs like ourselves. And inspiring ourselves. I'll say, you know what, because when I was watching some of our stuff, and
Okay.
even stuff that I say, I get re-energized and recharged during the week. I'm like,
I'm not gonna
this
lie,
is
it does. It kind of just
it,
puts that fire back in you for a moment.
right? But I'm like, hold up. You know what I mean? So at this point, motivating ourselves, and so thank you guys for joining us again. It's
For
your host,
another
Azimo.
beautiful week.
Yes. And I'm here with Kasuna, the
Y-
one and only.
your boy, you know it. You love him. He loves you back.
If this is your first time joining us, we do this every Monday, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join the gang.
And if you ain't sharing, I'm hurt. Like, you ain't sharing,
Yeah,
bro? I'm putting on the
yeah,
dually for you. This do
yeah.
rag is only on special occasions. This is a special occasion.
In fact, if you're not sharing, you should be stoned. Now go ahead and take that punch right somewhere. Now listen, Soda.
Yup.
It's been a week. It's been a whole
Bruh.
week, man. How have you been? What you been up to, bro?
Ugh.
What's the?
I'm gonna be honest. Amazon Prime Week has been killing me, and I
Oh
was I was so close to
yeah,
deciding that
absolutely.
I was gonna make like Steam hentai games to pay rent because I was almost out of it. I was so close to being that desperate. I was like, I can't do this anymore. But then I was like, you know what? Nope, just power through. Don't go down that alley because once you go down there, the money might entice you and you be stuck. I ain't trying to be like that forever.
For me, similar, man. Whew, life been trying to knock people out, man. Haymakers, jabs, uppercuts,
Yep.
combination. You took it back to basics on me. 1, 2. I had to hit life with So
I mean,
I've been in
based
here
off
fighting.
energy, look like you fighting back. I'm just taking the
Man,
beatings. You look like you actually winning at some of these fights.
man, I ain't gonna tell you I'm beating life. I'm gonna tell you I'm hitting it. You know what I'm saying? I can tell you I'm beating it. I'm gonna tell you I'm hitting it. Moving into everything. Today, we're talking about game mechanics versus story. This is
Ooh,
an age-old debate. This is probably something that has been debated since
the concept of
games.
story games.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Since they even introduced narrative to games, which, if you think about it,
Hmm.
we can probably say the first games were probably narrative driven, right? Like, as far as like, we're thinking Oregon Trail or like the MS-DOS games that were just like you typing in text. That kind of is how we started, right?
I
Like, if you think about
mean, if you think about I think gaming is always pushed by its technology. Like,
it.
if you think about like the original, like early games, you're thinking like war games like chess and things like that. It
Right,
wasn't necessarily like story. It was more like, well, this is the strategy we need to win wars. This is kind of how we like
right,
play it out. And then we build
right,
narratives around these things. So I think mechanics in some way come first, and then we build a story around it, or we use a story to justify the mechanics. I feel like you can't have one without the other per
right,
se. But now that how far we're into it now, I don't even it's hard to imagine just one thing without a little bit of the other. Like a
right.
pure mechanics game doesn't make sense to me, but
Mm.
there are probably a few out there that's just like, there's no story to this. Just fight. Just do this. Just experience. But what would be motivating you to keep going? Kind of get what I'm saying? Like it's hard to
I
have
think you
one
brought up
without the
a
other.
good point. You brought up a good point, and that is the idea that, of course, we all came from analog games first, right? So the first
Yeah.
game we're talking about tag, hide and seek, manhunt,
Boy, your boy
all
was
the
one
way
other
to,
manhunt.
man, listen, they can't catch me.
Bruh,
And so I'm
natural
out.
camouflage out here. Whoosh. Predator
I'm
before the
hot.
predator was
Listen
out.
to me.
Y'all weren't ready for it.
Hey, listen, Manhunt touched you too much, but but even then, like, like pickup games, basketball at the park, like baseball if you played it, football, soccer, like just those analog games. And if you think about it, they were kind of defined by their mechanics, right? Like, so soccer is, you can only use your feet. The ball shouldn't be in your hand unless it's a throw in. If you are running, if you're the first player on any side of the field minus the goalie ahead of the soccer ball, then you're offsides, right?
Ooh.
If you tackle the goalie, it's a goal. It's usually like a goal kick. If you do, you do like a harsh tackle to the goalie. If you get tackled inside the goal box, it's a penalty kick for you. If you try to score a goal and the goalie blocks it and it goes out, you get a corner kick. But of course, if you try to score the goal and the ball goes out, that becomes a throw in, or the goalie can, So it's like all these different mechanics that do govern this game, and there's really no story to soccer
But
per
that's the
se,
thing,
right?
though,
Like,
the story we create around it, though. Like, look at how big soccer is in the, like, UK and stuff. It isn't just, "Oh, they're just playing." Like, people build, like, lives around these things because it's the camaraderie, there's a story behind it, you're hearing about these players' lives and all that, and then you see how they're growing up. Like, we connect stories to those mechanics. Like, we're watching the game of soccer, but we're not just watching soccer. We're watching a progression. Like, is this team
right,
going to beat this team? If this team beats
right,
this, it causes this to happen. Even if you're not
right,
thinking about the overall story, there's a story there. So
right.
yeah,
And you're
those.
looking for your Ronaldos and your Messis and your Rooneys and
Oh,
your
shout out to Big Messi with the big cakes. Boy, I've been
right,
watching you with them calf
right.
muscles, bro.
I'm screaming. And you're right. So at that point, you get invested in the player. The player that you're watching then
Hmm.
becomes your story, and watching
Exactly.
them make it to like a World Cup, or winning their division. Cup. Although we were talking about analog games, we are game designers, and so what we design are video games. So your own definition, or based on how you see things, what are game mechanics?
Game mechanics in the simplest form is what you do in the game and what you're capable of doing. Like
Mm,
uh Mario in the simplistic form, the game mechanics is you're jumping, you're moving, you're flipping. Those are your game mechanics.
right,
How you affect the world, even in a way that's a game mechanic if it's designer's choice to make that a mechanic. The game mechanics is how you're interacting. Like, if
right,
I press this button, what does it do? That's a game mechanic. And when you're like creating a game, you're thinking about, all right, if I'm going to create this, what mechanics are needed to make this gameplay loop work? Because
right,
you can have a game with just one game mechanic, but you have to build your gameplay loop around that. So,
right.
in the simplest term, it's what was that 90s TV 90s thing? Verb. It's what you do. If you remember those old school commercials. So, in the simplest term, it's your verbs. It's what you're doing. Throwback to all the 90s kids who stayed up and watched Saturday
Absolutely.
morning cartoons.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%, right? Game mechanics are the in-game actions that connect the player to their character and environment, right?
Oh,
Things
look at
like,
you, big definition. Oh, you throwing out the big brains. All right, I see you.
I'm just saying, right? Things like walking, sprinting, jumping, shooting, crouching, and sneaking are just a few of the mechanics that can define a game and ultimately the player experience. Actually, with that list of mechanics, I think of games like Splinter Cell.
I was just about to say Splinter Cell.
I think of Metal Gear Solid, and I even think of Assassin's Creed. Right? You're walking, you're sprinting, you're jumping, shooting, crouching, and sneaking. So, in a more textbook way, we would say game mechanics are the systems or rules that govern the actions a player can take within the game.
Hmm.
For example, sprinting to avoid danger, or jumping to reach areas that are not normally accessible. Um, and this kind of gets into a sub set of that, which is like user stories, which is super like Jira, or like when you're, of course, like
You're
mapping out your
documenting.
game mechanics
I
and,
feel
and
you.
documenting it, and how you would explain why that mechanic is needed. Um, So you're jumping for what? And usually that would be to avoid something or to navigate to a space that is not usually accessible to the player, is not easily accessible by walking. You're usually crouching because you want to get to something that's underneath something else, or you want to move through a narrow space, like a tunnel or a vent. So that's also usually a navigation tool. Sneaking is avoidance. So when you start thinking of these things, and the bottom line to it is these mechanics usually are restrictions for the player. And I use the word restrictions very loosely because it's not necessarily restrictions, but this is how
It's your
it is
tool set.
determined the way that you will be able to move around, operate, function, and exist in this environment and get from level beginning to level end. What do you think makes a game fun? Is it the
Ooh.
story or the mechanics?
It is all right, so I'm a bit biased. I love story. Big story
Sure,
guy. But I cannot
sure.
deny you can make a game that's just pure story, like a I'm gonna say this and it's gonna sound rude, like a walking simulator. Like, I don't mean that in any negative connotation. I have nothing against considering walking simulators like games. But if you're making a walking simulator, you need a good story to justify that aspect. Like, when you think about video games, you're thinking, I'm interacting with the game, I'm the force that causes the game to move forward. And if you're just observing the video game mostly, then the story needs to be fire. At that point, the difference between a walking simulator and a movie is you can kind of control the pace. And if you can't control the pace and you're just struggling, then just watch a movie. So for me, what makes a good game has to be great story with at least a good gameplay loop. Like, I'm
Mm,
again, big bias on my end. Love story. Story over mechanics, but mechanics
yeah,
are important.
yeah.
What about you? How you which what would you put your hands in?
I'm definitely on the opposite side of that spectrum.
I'm not
I
gonna
would
lie,
say,
I knew that was coming. Big
I
mechanics
would
guy over here.
say, yeah, I would say mechanics, right? While a good story can make a game super interesting and sell the reason for the mechanics, without good mechanics, a game becomes a graphic novel, right? It turns into that R.L. Stein,
Jackson
Goosebumps,
Stung. Mm.
turn to page 32 if you would do A, turn to page 47 if you would do B. Like that's boring to me. And once again, this is personal preference, but at the end of the day, that's boring to me. I want to be a bit more in
Involved.
control of what happens and involved, right? And
Okay.
and I think game mechanics sell that.
Mhm.
There are some exceptions to the rules. We'll
Oh,
get into
true,
that later.
true.
But for the most part, if a game has bad or few mechanics, I feel like immersion is destroyed instantly. I think the very minute that you're struggling with the game's mechanics, it's over. It doesn't matter how good the story is. It doesn't matter if you're wrapped up in it at that moment when it's not functioning the way that you need it to, or that it should, or that is expected based on what's presented, that you're going to break immersion. I also think that the mechanics sell the story, right? Like, and
Ooh.
so
Whoa.
it's like a
Put that pistol away, all right? Because
I'm just saying,
talking big game right there. Mechanics selling story? Sometimes.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
I can't.
it's a give and take.
Mhm,
It's a give and take.
mhm.
You know, story sell mechanics, right? Like,
That I could see.
Street Fighter, for example. Ryu has these combinations and these power ups and these special, abilities that go with his actual background story. So when he's doing, a Hadouken or whatever, like it connects itself with this character's background story to make it all make sense. Yet at the same time, based on the way that Street Fighter is set up, which is a perfect game for this example, the mechanics really sell Street Fighter because Street Fighter is introduced in the arcade, and you don't really get too much backstory about Ryu or Ken or anyone when you're at the arcade. Like, you just see these characters, you pick them, and as you do the moves, you learn what they do. So that's where I think like mechanics
I'm about
become
to blow this whole thing
the
wide
the,
open.
the paramount for sure. It becomes the paramount in this issue because it's like mechanics are what keep the player engaged.
Mhm.
The story usually sells the mechanics, or the mechanics sell the story. So
Okay,
I think
okay.
mechanics make the game most fun. Yeah.
So you brought up Street Fighter, which great game to pick. That's a mechanic heavy game, very
Mhm.
technical. What happened when Ryu? I think it was Street Fighter 2. Ryu gets into a fight. He beats somebody, and then he would say this line that was mistranslated, which caused a huge thing where people were hunting down this mysterious character. He would win a fight and be like, "You couldn't defeat me unless you beat Shang Long" or something like that.
Right.
That was even though it was just a small level of dialogue that was just mistranslated, it created this huge story which pushed that game even bigger. Which I'm saying, even though the mechanics were the main aspect of the game, the concept of there's a possible story here, there's a possible something here, blew it up even higher. Now Street Fighter is like a mainstay. They actually released that character now. Like story, whether you want to admit it or not, even though you're not saying anything against it, story can really push things to the forefront on a higher level than just plain mechanics. That's why I believe, on a personal level, Call of Duty fell off after what you call Black Ops 2. The story just didn't
Mm,
hit that well for me anymore because I was like, well,
mm,
there's no story here. The
mm.
mechanics, can't deny it was fun. But if you think of one of the biggest flops in Call of Duty's history, what was Advanced Warfare? Some of the best mechanics I've ever seen in a Call of Duty game. Worst one ever. Worst Call of Duty ever because I'm sorry to say the story did not hit. Did not hit. Story carries games when the mechanic and the gameplay loop is gets stale.
I, I'll agree with you there. I'll say the issue with Call of Duty is that their mechanics are a little cookie cutter.
It is.
Um, and so because of that, you already know what to expect going in. So if there's no story to sell why you're here, that is going to create an issue because you already know what to expect. So
Exactly.
I'll agree with that. I'll agree with that. Do you have an example of games, and you've mentioned some already. You've
Mhm.
also mentioned how story has been affected. But do you have an example of games with good stories that made up for a lack of game mechanics?
So, I have a few, but they're hard to describe as games themselves without calling them walking simulators. And
Okay.
that's kind of where I'm like, I hit a wall personally because like what was it? There's like games like
So
What Happened to
don't
Edel.
don't don't forget your thought. I just would like you to, because you said this twice now.
Mhm.
For those people who don't know what a walking simulator
Ooh,
is,
good point.
define walking simulator.
So I would consider a walking simulator a game where you have almost no other input than to just simply move forward. You're not
Okay.
you're not like you could be the protagonist, but you're having a story told to you. You're not really doing anything in the story. You're kind of just
Okay.
experiencing something. Now, that
Okay.
is a valid form of gameplay to me. I don't deny that. That's valid. But I wouldn't call it like the most engaging game to play. Like your immersion is there, but it's not like deep. It's like surface levels personally.
Sure.
Like I
Yeah.
was what was it? Like Firewatch. Great game, great mechanics in it, but I think Firewatch is a great game, but if anything, it's a game where you're not doing more than just kind of experiencing a moment. Like you're just going through things,
Mhm.
but you're not fighting anything, you're not shooting anything, you're kind of surviving, but you're going to survive anyways. It's kind of like it's scripted in a way
Are
where
you going to survive Firewatch anyway?
I mean, I survived it. It was a fun game. I enjoyed it, and I didn't feel like it was difficult. But compared to like a game like The Forest, bro, I died in The Forest a lot. But that game had and like the story was lackluster because I didn't know it was a story half the time and I was just struggling to survive. Like that's the difference between like a game that's like crazy with their mechanics, but not really telling a story unless you go out there and look for it. Shout out
Mhm.
to Dark Souls, you know. But
Mhm.
again, like so like what was it? What's that one game with Edith Finch? Like you're experiencing the story and you're kind of doing things and you're just watching it go down, but you're not really doing much. So there's games where I can say like, yeah, full story, not a lot of mechanics, walking simulators type situation. You're not like you're walking, you're not adventuring, you're not doing anything, you're just experiencing it. That's the best way I can explain a walking sim. Just experiencing what's given to you without you doing much. It's the movie experience you control. There we go.
I agree. I agree with you here.
Man, I took a
And
lot of words to say that.
but it's weird because we don't often agree, which is what makes this dynamic. But
Oh, well, we agree
I
I'm beautiful, so that's all that matters.
I agree here 100%.
Agreed.
Um, I think Telltale specifically as a company has mastered creating stories that make up for games that lack mechanics.
That's a good point.
From the Walking Dead series to Wolf Among Us to the Batman, they did not do a very good job with the Game of Thrones one, but
I enjoyed the Game of Thrones one. It was different. I enjoyed it.
it,
I
we'll leave it to art being subjective and say
Yeah, that I got better taste in art, what can I say?
I won't say that, but I'll say that this is a company that's mastered what we can call, I guess, story-based interactive games
Mhm.
that lack mechanics. Because in The Walking Dead, which is the Walking Dead series, which is one of my favorite games I've ever played, I got the same feeling in The Last of Us 2 with Clementine and this
Ellie?
girl's name is Ellie. Thank you so much. It really slipped my
I'm a
mind.
big
With
fan, so I'm always
Clementine
gonna
and
remember the
Ellie,
name.
yes, thank you so much. With Clementine and Ellie, I got the same feeling from both. Obviously, I experienced it first in The Walking Dead, but you do very little in the Walking Dead series. You can move around in these little zones that they allow for you to move around in, but a lot of it is just interacting and making choices based on whatever the interaction is, and that just pushes the story forward. But
True.
I was engaged in that game, even though there were very limited mechanics. I felt it when Lee died in the end.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I felt it when we couldn't find Javier, right, for a little while we were, in that particular series. I felt it when what's the baby's name? I haven't played that game in a little while, but
Wait,
it's AJ. That's the baby's name, AJ.
I
You know that.
actually forgot that completely. Damn. I'm the story
Right?
guy, and I forgot story points. Ooh,
When Kenny dies, like all of these things are things that stand out to me more so than the mechanics. So
mhm.
that has definitely mastered that, and that's a perfect example. I would say also Life is Strange.
Life is Strange is a great story game more than a
Yeah,
mechanic-heavy game.
yeah, very high school, very a little emo for me, but
It's a
they
slice of
put you
life.
they put you in this space, and I felt it, and there wasn't very much to it. Detroit Being Human is enough.
That's also good. Yeah, you're calling
I
out a good lot of games with good story, but not heavy mechanics. They got good
no,
mechanics. Like, they polished their mechanics well enough for it to tell
yeah,
the story, and I do agree
but
with that. Yeah, not
very little, very little.
but
Um,
when I think of things like that, I feel like those are the games that as much as I like them, I stray away from them for, like, if I'm not in the mood to just experience just the story, I need games where I'm engaged a bit more. Like,
sure.
if I'm gonna play a game where the story's, like, really important to me, I need to have a reason why the story's important. So I'm gonna play a game like God of War. I'm gonna play, like, an
Mm,
action-heavy game where my actions are literally the reason why this thing is going down. Like,
mm,
I need games where I know I'm the reason this is happening. That's why I'm a huge
that's
Final
true.
Fantasy fan. Like,
That's
whether you like it or not, you are the main character. You are the protagonist. Nothing happens or will happen without you. Love those games.
and not to be riding Naughty Dog's wave so hard because
Oh,
this is the third episode and I've mentioned them yet again. But this is why what they've done with The Last of Us 2 is so powerful because they took this same mechanic breakup, like not mechanic breakup, but this same ideology that comes from games that don't have as many mechanics, and they were able to implement it in a game where you have full control over the character. And I think um that's worth shouting out and just noting because once again they ended up taking adventure and narrative driven games to a whole other level just because they they did that. And tip my hat off once again to Telltale. They're really masters of this. You have an example of a game or games with good mechanics that made up for a lack of story.
NBA 2K, any of them. I'm
Mm.
sorry, but their stories sometimes be trash as hell, but those
Mm.
mechanics are hella fun, especially when
Shout
you
out to
mu
NBA ballers who tried to give a story to basketball, even
right?
though that didn't kind of go where it should have went. But get head back to the 2K. I just wanted to shout that out because they did try.
They
Somebody
did,
tried to
they
do
tried. Here's the thing, I'll
it.
give it to them, they do put stories in it, and the stories are, like, I'm sorry to say, they basic. "Oh, you're a good player from high school or college, and then you get into the NBA." It's the same story over and over again, except you just
Right.
get to be, like, the self-insert, which for some, that's all they need. For me, I needed, like, a little bit more. After a while, I
Yeah.
just kinda made it, like, my own story in my own head, but the mechanics, tight. Great mechanics. Like, I can't
Yeah.
deny it. Even people who say these are, like, cookie cutter games, like, "Oh, it's just the same game." Yeah, but they make those mechanics sometimes they tweak them in a way that just feels really nice. Like, a game on the Switch that I really enjoyed was the NBA, what you call it? I don't know, it was like playing NBA Jam all over again, where it was just 2
Mm.
on 2, and it was just slam dunking, it was just fun. It was just pure
Mm.
fun. No story.
Mm.
Didn't pay attention to any story at all. Straight mechanic. I was just playing legendary ballers, just straight up dunking on people. That is a game where I didn't need a story to have fun with it, and it was just pure mechanics, and I was, like, loving that. And it's weird that it's the sports games for me when it comes to that. The games that I
Yeah.
don't need a story for are the ones that honestly kinda be the most fun, even though I don't play them too heavy. I'm learning a
And,
little bit
and,
about myself today. Was not expecting that.
and that's very interesting. I like that you said 2K. Because I want to say that in recent 2Ks, they have definitely tried to take that NBA bowler idea and bring it into 2K. Um, as far as giving you some type of background story. If I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong as the
You've been
more
corrected.
prominent
You're
2K
fine.
player,
I already corrected you. You did. You're good.
as the more adept and experienced 2K player here.
Not by much. Don't get me wrong. I've only beaten like 2 of the games.
I feel as though the more recent ones did involve a story where you were like, you started off in the city, you had to play on the courts, you had to play on the streets and win there, and then, make it, do your thing in high school and do your thing, in the NBA, et cetera, et cetera. You get to go to like, these little my part, but then you also get to go to like actual gyms where you can practice your skill. Like
True.
you get to like kind of explore this little city outside of actually being um just the NBA star in
Yeah,
the
true.
actual court.
And it
Um
is the most boring part of the game. It is
is
the
it
most boring part. Like, oh, like after a certain game, if you lose, you could hear them judging how you were playing and all this other stuff. I thought that was pretty interesting. But after
right,
that, just put me in the next basketball game so I can play again. Like,
right,
the story isn't even like the forefront. Like every time I play a 2K game, I'm literally playing to make my character better. So I could take it out onto like the online place, play on there, see how I'm competing, and then go back
right,
and practice. It's the weirdest
right,
thing. I could literally do that in real life, but I refuse to because I'd rather do it on 2K, I guess. I don't know.
right,
It's the one
right,
game where I don't hate the story, I just don't care about it.
right,
I know somebody out there does. I just don't. Just like
right.
how you don't care for Stray, even though Stray is actually a pretty good game. Low
Yeah,
mechanics, good story.
I'll leave Stray alone because Stray is a Stray. It's a Stray game.
That
What
people love.
what I'll say is this. One, I guess we can say that for the entire genre that is sports games in general. So this same thing applies to Madden, NHL, it applies to MLB, it applies to FIFA.
Can we still call it
It,
FIFA? They no longer have the license to the name anymore. But
well,
we're gonna call it like
insert new name.
something
Until
Sports
then,
Club.
right? Until then, what we refer to what we currently know as FIFA and will be changed later. Like that whole um
Genre?
genre is mechanics driven without a story.
True.
Um, the way that games kind of got hot, which is golden era, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, like that, the entire arcade element was just consistently good mechanics with no story,
I'll give you that
right?
one, yeah. I'm thinking about
Donkey
time in
Kong,
arcades.
doesn't really have a story. Yes, you got to save Peach, but the, Donkey Kong doesn't really have a story.
I
Um,
feel like it does have a story. It tells the story without telling you the story directly. Like when you turn on the game, a random monkey shows up, it has a lady, and you already know the hero's tale. Well, you got to go save the lady. There's your story right there. There's your motivation. Like, gonna be honest, I don't know this lady from any other lady. Why am I saving this one? You can fill in the space yourself. There's a story
because
there.
it's also a long term goal for the game. So it's
Mhm.
like it also it doubles, right? Like, but there's no real story. There's no introduction when you get there. You're a magical dude that can jump real high, and here is this dude that stole the girl that you were with just yesterday, and now you need to get her back. You don't get all that information. All you get is, like you said, monkey with the girl, you're here, dodge the barrels, jump, avoid, do what you gotta do. Yeah, that goes for even when Mario becomes his own game. Pac-Man is a perfect game that literally has no story. Like,
Ooh,
what is the story of Pac-Man, really? But you have two main mechanics: you move and you eat. There's a purpose for all of them, right? Like, you move to eat, you move to avoid, but all you do is move and eat. There's really
true.
no story. Pong, we brought up
Oh yeah.
off camera.
Oh,
There's no
Pong is
story for
tennis.
Pong,
Pong is tennis. You could build a story out of
right?
that.
But there is no story. So
There's
it's
no
like,
initial story. You're right.
but it was still an incredible game.
I
I spoke
mean,
about this earlier.
it's a game. I'm gonna give it
For,
that.
for, its, for,
Incredible has
for, its,
changed now.
for its time,
For its time.
let
For its time. Yeah.
me make that clear.
But you ain't
And
beating. You ain't breaking no records now, Pong. Where you at? Step it up. Where the graphics upgrade?
the entire arcade catalog, uh,
Oof. I would have said the
everything you ever played in
entire
the
arcade
arcade.
catalog. Some of them have stories. Mortal Kombat had a story.
Mortal Kombat has zero story in the
What?
arcade when you first start playing it.
When you start playing it, you're joining the tournament of the Mortal Kombat. You're fighting for Earthrealm.
I didn't get over that
Really?
from the game. I really didn't. I just put my quarter in, I
Oh,
jumped
well,
in
you
there, and
put your quarter in. I didn't. I read it because I didn't have quarters, so I was reading the screen, and
oh,
the screen was
gotcha,
telling me there was a whole reason for it. It was
gotcha,
story
gotcha,
for
gotcha.
me. Us broke
But
folk got story. I guess you, Mister, I
it,
got
it,
quarters, and I could just
Nah, I
play.
just went in there, I put the quarter in, and I started. You start at, you fight whoever, you beat him, and you keep going up until you know what I'm saying.
I feel like
And
that's a story. That's a classic tournament arc.
that's a goal.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
goal.
the tournament
These,
arc.
these are these are short-term and long-term goals that the player must achieve in order to complete the gameplay loop that you
Yeah.
spoke
In
about.
design terms, yeah, buddy, you remove design helmet, bro. That's your anime protagonist arc, what do you call it?
That's
Tournament
that's
arc,
that's
fighting
that's
your
your
way to the
imagine.
top.
That's your imagination creating a story from
And
outside
that's the
stimulus.
best part.
But
I'm in this
we
industry
now
to build that, baby. That's need that.
I agree, but we're not debating that. The
True.
point is that there's a lack of a story, not necessarily that there's no story at all,
That's
but
true. I'll give
their
you that.
story is not necessarily the focus. To bring it to something more recent,
Okay.
I don't know if you played Maneater by Tripwire.
That's the one with the
Um,
shark?
yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
So that was probably the last game I played that was really, really just fun.
Oh,
And there is
a
a
game,
story.
a fun that's just a fun game.
Yeah, there is a story about Scaly Pete, and he killed your mom and then threw you out back into the water, and then you had to survive in the bayou with the crocodiles. But there's not really a story. The story is really like a thin wire that's just keeping everything in it, keeping everything in sync with the main idea of the game. Rather,
I feel you.
as far as the game, it's Tiny Planet version 2,
Here's
right?
here's something I always like to call that. As games advance, there will always be a moment where you create a video game as video game. That's what I consider like games where there's like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. We understand that, but it's just fun. Like video game as games.
They tied
Trademark.
in, yeah,
There's a
but they
story.
tied in a story to make it make sense. But it wasn't about, who cared about Scaly Pete. I'm a shark,
And
and
I'm
like I said,
Skyly.
it's Tiny Planet V2, right? You keep consuming things that are smaller than you until you become big enough to consume things that were once bigger than you, and like that was, there was so much satisfaction in eating a bunch of barracuda and trout and stuff like that until I was big enough to take on a crocodile, until I could take on a mako, until I'm the biggest thing in the ocean, and an orca can't even mess with me, right? Like that's when you know you're
Mhm.
taking out blue whales or sperm whales and orcas, and you're like, yeah, I'm you in the deep with it.
You know.
There's a point in the game. Hey, there's a point in the game where you come out the open sea, right?
Mhm.
And you see a orca, and man, it put the fear of God in you from a game perspective, right? Because you know you ain't big enough, and if this thing come over here, and of course, they captured so well um, the feeling of open water and being in the deep sea, and um, if you know anything about killer whales, like killer whales kill sharks,
Oh,
right? They
yeah.
kill everything. Really, like
They
they're
earned the
really
name. They got them those aren't eyes on its face. Those are, teardrop tattoos. It's letting you know what's up. Those
yeah,
ain't those they ain't joking. They bully
they're
the ocean.
probably more dangerous than actual sharks, but we don't have no orca movie, which I want to see. But
I
but
would
going
love
back
to
to the point,
see I would
of
love to
orca
see
movie,
a
right?
gang-related orca movie.
That would be dope. That would be
The Atlantic
dope.
orcas versus the Indian orcas. I'll be like, "Hey, yo, what you doing in my neighborhood?"
Yeah,
Oh,
you
if you can
know,
make it happen,
but
put the
no,
bandanas on
but
the orcas, make the video. I'm trying to watch.
yeah, but you got the feeling still when you came out as a shark and you came into this open water, and the first thing you see is this black and white sea cow just moving back and forth, and you're like, I'm a shark. This thing is my natural predator. Usually I'm apex predator here, but in this particular space, in this particular situation, this is the apex predator, and you feel it, and until you become the biggest thing moving in the ocean, and you feel that,
Mm, that's
you
what I call
feel that,
good game mechanics when you get that
yeah.
feeling.
Yeah, you feel that.
Well, can
Mhm.
mechanics I'm thinking in a game like that where the mechanics technically is leading the story. Like the story isn't really the main focus. In a game like that where mechanics are pretty much setting you up to pretty much fulfill your own power fantasy in that aspect.
Yeah, yeah.
I I know that's a valid way to tell a story, but would you say it should be the premier way of telling stories? Like what would be the best way to present your stories if you're like creating a just a video game ass game? What would be your premier way of doing it? Would you tell the story through mechanics specifically, or would you do it through like, oh well, I got a story I want to tell, but there's moments where I'll bring it up and tell it, and then let the players have fun, and then bring up the story again. What would be your preferred way as the brains of the situation?
It 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 honestly just depends because what you're saying is we're making a video game as video game. Uh,
So fun is the main objective.
so then, if that's the case, and we're using Maneater, we're using Mario, we're using Pac-Man, we're using games that we got lost in. Kirby was one of the first games that I got exposed to. We're using the methodology behind those games, which were 100% mechanics driven. The story really just explained the mechanics back then. Like nowadays, the mechanics explain the story, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Right? That's really the whole point of this episode, to explore, you know, that whole idea of story versus mechanics. If there's even a versus, or if
I mean,
but
story
at the
will
end of
win
the
hands down, no question asked. But that's besides.
I don't know that, because here we have these games that we're talking about even now that are specifically mechanics driven, and the story is only to tie in why the mechanics are this way, so you don't you get the immersion of it. So if we're saying anything, story is necessary for immersion for sure, because as a player, you're gonna need an explanation. Why can't I only run and jump and move in this one direction? And that's not necessarily explained to you through somebody telling you, "Hey, you're Mario, and Mario is only able to move in this direction because he got trapped in a TV, and you don't." Like it's
True.
just a game. You can
But
move this way,
but
and
humans love stories. Whether you like it or not, humans love stories. That's the one thing that will always surpass. Like we have so many things. Like textbooks will give you full explanations on why things work. But you'd rather hear it through a story. Story is the best way to portray information. So we can have mechanics, but story is
I don't know.
the great justifier.
I don't know that we disagree there, or that we're on opposing sides there. I My perfect example is when we were kids, right?
Mhm.
And this is definitely analog game related, but when we were kids, we spent a lot of time playing tag. And tag is a game, tag, freeze tag, hide and seek, manhunt. These are games we spent a lot of time playing, during recess, after school, when we were with
Before
our friends.
school.
And there's no story to tag.
It was skill
Like,
based, you're right.
right, there is zero. So honestly, you'll play a game
Good point.
that's old mechanics, and you'll have a lot of fun, and there'll be no story. There's no story to hide and
Right.
seek.
You creating a
And
story. Now you got something to talk about when you're at school. You're like, "Bro, so there I was. Bro, they couldn't catch me. I was too fast. Broke his ankles. I'm just crazy." You just created a story playing the game. You're right. Started without one, but you created one. Because I'm not gonna lie, your boy was killing it. I had to tell the boys about it.
but it's not needed to have fun.
It's not needed, but it adds extra.
It's immersion. For example, hide and seek is hide and seek.
True.
Dead by Daylight
Ooh, I
is
like where
hide and seek.
I get where you're going
But
for.
here's an entire reason to hide, and here's an entire reason to seek. Because
Okay,
now,
okay, okay, okay,
you
okay.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
but
it doesn't hate.
now I'm about to drop it on you real quick. Hide and seek.
Mm.
Why are we playing it?
Why are we playing hide and seek?
It's an evolutionary thing that we developed to teach ourselves how to survive before time. Hide and seek was clearly a game for kids, but it was an evolutionary reason why we played it, why we enjoyed it. We had to learn at a time when we didn't have a way to defend ourselves so easily. We needed to learn to hide, how to seek things, how to do things, and we kind of turned it into a game. So technically, in a weird way, the story came before the mechanic. I'm just playing. I'm just stretching. I'm stretching for that one. It's a reach. But
I was gonna say, because then what you're kind of working against your point
yeah,
here,
no, I
because
am. I as I
yeah,
was saying it.
here we are creating mechanics in order to tell the story. All right, so with that, are there games that have not enough of either story or mechanics, or too much of one? In other words,
Ooh,
are there games that have too much mechanics, too much story, or that don't have enough mechanics or enough story, and that's why they're not fun?
well, now we're asking ourselves, have we played a bad game? Because
Hmm.
to not have a good balance of both, you have to either be really good at one or really good at the other. If you don't have a good balance of both, you created a bad game.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself, when was the last time you played a bad game and noticed it? I'm gonna be honest. It's been a while since I've had a bad game where I was like visibly like, ugh, story sucks, the mechanic sucks, all this is just bad.
I think bad game is subjective, so I don't think that's a very objective.
Oh no, I can straight up say it. If I'm playing a game and I think it's bad, it's bad. I'm not like it's
Because look,
subjective,
because
but
look,
there's some things that are just bad.
we had this discussion off camera, right? Like, I think Stray is a bad game,
It's not
but
though.
you have offered, um, I guess what we can call evidence that there is a subset of people
A good
within the
demographic.
community
Mhm.
that, I don't know if it's a good demographic, but a subset that exists within the entire gaming community that can appreciate and think that this game adds value, to the landscape. I am not one of those people.
It
You
wasn't
know what
made
I
for you.
mean?
But that makes sense.
But that's my whole point, right? It's subjective. Like, you think that it's a good game. I do not. So when we say it's a bad game, I don't know that it's the same thing. What I'm
Okay.
saying is, from your perspective, are there games that you played where you did not have fun because specifically there was too much story or too much mechanics or not enough of either? I'll give you an example to start. The
Okay.
Long Dark for me. I don't know if you ever played The Long Dark.
I like
The Long
Long
Dark
Dark.
is a survival game, right? So you have played it. The Long Dark doesn't have enough story to keep me interested.
Hmm.
The Long Dark has tons of mechanics,
That
tons
is
of
true.
survival mechanics that are fun at first. I like collecting ice to turn it into wood. I like hunting for food. I like the resource management and how, like, you're affected by how much you carry. Um,
You're right. That is good mechanics. Not a lot of
but there's
story.
but there's not. Eventually, I got bored because it's like there's nothing driving me to continue playing this game.
I feel you
Um,
'cause I remember the same reason is why I stopped playing also is because I didn't get engaged enough on just the mechanics alone, like,
yeah, but great mechanics though.
great
Like it
mechanics.
had really, yeah, it was really selling me this, especially the first maybe 3 hours of gameplay for me were for not like I really felt like I crashed this plane, I landed in, the winter wonderland, and now I have to survive. I have to collect wood, I have to, start fires, I have to try to find clothes I can keep warm, I have to, try to stay away from water, I have to make sure that, I have torches and stuff that I can see at night, I have to conserve my ammo because there are no guns. um, I gotta watch out for wolves when I'm out there. You are also being hunted by this bear, and you have to so there are missions.
To keep you
It's
going.
just that, but there's such a long gap, and the story's not engaging enough to make me want to traverse this huge space to even get to the next, I guess what we would call a set piece, because it's like I just don't care enough. Like,
So,
so
that
that's
means the gameplay loop wasn't able to carry you on to the next part. Well, then that makes now you have to ask yourself, can a gameplay loop be so engaging that story can actually almost take not just like a side part, but can borderline not exist for that? Like, I'm trying to think of a game where the gameplay loop is so good, I don't really mind the story not being as prolific. I guess okay, I'm about to do it again. I'm jumping back on
fighting.
FromSoft. Yo, Elden Ring, Dark Souls, all of that. I'm gonna be honest. The story usually comes second to me when I'm playing those games. The mechanics are just that good. But I'm always intrigued. Like I stay for the game because the story is so damn. I'm trying to think this one through. I'm always gonna throw some FromSoft in these pods. I'm just letting you know I need at least one FromSoft shout out because big fan, big simping out here for them. Let me think.
That one. But
I got it. I can't really think of it. Yeah. There's really a gameplay loop can really carry a game. I started this pod thinking story over everything, but now I'm leaving it thinking, yo, mechanics can actually hold it down by themselves sometimes.
but not it didn't work in the long dark.
It didn't.
It didn't work in the long dark.
Why didn't it work in the long dark? But it could work for like a Dark Souls game where you don't really know what's going on half the time. You get a vague idea and then you just sent out to survive.
They spent more time creating interesting moments in the game. You have enemies to fight, you have things to explore, you have new you're always getting some type of action to
Oh,
feed you at Dark Souls. And in the long dark, you spend so much time away from everything that it's like it's just you in isolation.
but I feel like that's the
Um,
point though. Like the long dark is the isolation.
but but what I'm saying is there was no story. Like, yes, the long dark is you crashed, you're stranded, you're trying to survive, you need to figure out how you can get about this situation that you're in the snow, in the cold, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
Yes, but there's so much time spent traversing around this huge world that is obviously selling the fact that you're stranded, obviously selling the fact that you're out in desolate areas where there's really nothing around you, obviously, but there's not enough going on to keep me engaged to continue trying to play this game to its actual conclusion, because there's no story saying, yeah, you need to trek these miles because this thing that good that we need to find out what happens next. It's like I
True.
really don't.
Not
Nor
enough
is the
breadcrumbs to keep you
experience
going.
of I and right. So not enough even going on while you're getting to the space to keep. So right, breadcrumbs would be the best explanation of that. I experienced that same thing with Subnautica.
What?
Um,
Early Subnautica or the new like how it is now?
you know, a little bit of both. Like there's a story there for Subnautica, but then there's no story there for Subnautica. You're just stranded, and
But here's what
you
I
got to
like
figure
about
this stuff.
Subnautica is the progression through gameplay. Like that
Mm,
game, I like it because like the more you explore, the more you gather resources, it gives you the ability to progress through technology. And as you're progressing in these games, your ability to travel more becomes like the story. Like, "Oh, I can only go this deep, I can only go this far, but because I found this, I'm able to progress my tech this way. I can go farther, see more." It rewards, the little bit of gameplay you are able to master gives you more to go out and gain more, and I love that. That's where the
If
progression
you
builds it
care
for me.
if you care about exploration,
I
if you care about but you do, so I'm just saying,
yeah.
if you care about exploration,
You ever play
if you
Ark?
care Ark,
Ark Survival?
not for
That
very
game
long,
has no story, but the
but
mechanic good.
I have not played it for very long for this exact. That's actually for me another example of a game that does not have enough story to keep me engaged. Although the mechanics are pretty good,
Oh my
you
god,
know.
we switch places. Somehow you're the story guy now. I'm now the mechanics guy. Oh,
No,
you
sir. On the flip side,
Jedi mind
there's
trick
a
me.
new game coming out
Ooh,
called As Dusk Falls.
ooh, I have been paying attention. I've seen it.
That game has way too much story and
Really?
not enough mechanics for
Alright.
me.
Alright, so I'm gonna flip it. I think it has great story. I think it's gonna tell a great story. And honestly, the
But
mechanics might not really hinder
ain't,
that
ain't,
for
ain't,
me.
ain't no mechanics because you're watching this concept art play across your screen and you press little buttons to interact. Tap Y to pet the dog, press A now, select this. How is this? And it's like, for me, what works with a Telltale is that there's still that level of me actually playing as Lee,
True.
you know, as Clementine, as Javier. Like, I'm still in control of this character at some point. As Dusk Falls, you're never actually in control of any character. You're literally watching a graphic novel on screen. For me, super boring. Um, just not enough actual game mechanics and gameplay for someone like me. I
Feel
need
you.
more gameplay.
I feel
Um,
you. From what I'm getting here, you're a man of you need to have some impact in your world. That's why I think you would enjoy
yeah.
D&D very much. Whenever you get a chance, go ahead and play a game. Recommend you like it.
Which would you start with when designing a game then? Would you start with game mechanics? Would you start with story? And why?
So I guess I'm gonna jump on my hypocrite side here and say mechanics
Mhm.
first. I'm gonna say make the
Okay.
mechanics first and then build the story around.
Mm.
Because if you're making a game, you got to have a gameplay loop, and the gameplay loop is important. And if your
Mm.
main goal is to tell a story, sometimes you don't need a game to tell your story. You can just tell a story. But you got mechanics. It can only be made better with story in some situations. But I say build the mechanics first, build your features, get your features out, get your design document, get a good skeleton first. And once you got the skeleton in, add the story on top. The story can only can be better, personally. Like, for example, if I was creating a heavy JRPG type game, I know at the end
Mm.
of the game you're gonna fight God. It's just the
Mm.
rules of the game. But let's make sure the game actually plays well so you can get there. Because the story's
Right.
fun, but
Right.
it'd be horrible to go spend 100 hours on a horrible game just because the story's
Right.
good. So they
Right.
make the mechanics first. What about you? What would you recommend?
It's gonna sound strange. I say it's either or, and it really
Ooh,
depends on what you're going for. I think if you're making a narrative based game, like let's say The Last of Us, I may have started with the story of The Last of Us and then kind of wanted to play with the mechanics to see what would best sell this story to the player and to give them the experience. But conversely, if I'm making, I hate to bring up a Mario or a Sonic or whatever, it's like I would probably start with the mechanics first and then go into the story. So I think it's all about player experience here. This is what it comes down to in my mind. Like, what is the experience you want to get this player? Is this about enthralling them in a story, having them feel like they're part of a universe that's greater than even themselves and the player, and then having mechanics that support that feeling? Or is it about creating great hand-eye moments um, that can be explained by a story, or a better way to say that is it about creating these action sequences within the game that the player has complete control over that you then explain with a story? And so for me, I'd say it really depends on what you're going for, because based on our podcast here today, I think they're both equally as important, depending on which side of the fence you fall on when designing whatever game you're looking for.
Okay.
Um,
I put a gun to your head and I force you to pick one. Mechanics or story. You gotta use one first. Which one you going for? There's only one
um,
bullet in the chamber, so you only get one answer.
that's a wicked question because I honestly believe to my core that they're both important.
Just
Um,
cocked it back. You better make a quick answer. Four, three,
I don't
two.
know.
It's a Desert Eagle. It ain't gonna miss. One.
I guess mechanics.
Bam. That's all I needed. You heard it here first. Mechanics over star. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. I ain't
Yeah,
gonna.
yeah, I guess if I had to pick, but I can see applications for story too though. But
I
yeah,
know it works both
um,
ways, but I
yeah,
say
it depends.
build the skeleton first, then add the story. Personally.
Yeah, but you can make a skeleton story. So it's like
Ooh,
stories are skeletons. Like you draft your essays first, right? So it's like you can. I mean, I don't. I just write the whole essay, but
true.
like technically speaking, when you do, you're supposed to like plan it and draft it, and But
Gotta
the
get your
idea
documentation right.
is, hey, this is what is the story of this game? Quick synopsis. All right, cool. Player needs to save his ex-wife from her new husband, who is
That's
the
her
head
business. That's her
of a
business.
criminal or ahead of a criminal enterprise. And he is ex-military, spec ops, you know,
Wait, if I
cool.
understand this story correctly, I'm wasting government money to take care of my messy divorce because she made a
Nah,
mistake. Oh, I like this
it's,
story. This is a good story because this
it's,
got some webs we need to untangle.
right. So so we think about that as like, all right, so what kind of mechanics do we? Well, he's spec ops, right? So, well, is this first person? Is this third person? If it's third person, all right. So we got aim over the shoulder. Do we want to switch camera perspectives? Maybe so. We'll do some ghost recon thing. Like, all right, cool. So we'll switch to FPS when he wants us to do so.
And now we
What we
switch it
want.
up a little bit where now we have to add a little resource management because now you're using spec ops, so now you're using government tax money. Now you got to justify this. Now I'm gonna need to understand why your ex-wife is costing me my taxes. So so now the story is playing into the mechanics.
I'm screaming, but in effect, yes. You know what I mean? Like, so with that, here we go, starting to list out the mechanics to make a story. Yet, like we started with in the beginning, if I say to you, the player can walk, sprint, jump, shoot, crouch, and sneak, we're already thinking, well, you know what? Splinter Cell, Metal Gear Solid, right? Like, so you can take those mechanics and still wrap a whole story around that, and it's like, hey, this guy's a secret agent that, he had a Jason Bourne moment, and now he has to break into his old, uh, you know, organization headquarters to get information about himself, and all of that comes wrapped around from these mechanics. I think either or is completely fine depending on what you start with. You know what I'm saying? Like you might just be in your head like, man, I want to make a game like Pac-Man. And it's like, all right, cool, Pac-Man's cool. So you just want to make Pac-Man flap? It's like, no, I want to make Pac-Man Grand Theft Auto,
What?
where Pac-Man's in a
What?
car in a 3D space, and like he's running over the ghosts instead of eating them. But he can only do that after he drives over some transformer pellet that turns his car from.
Regular Buick to a monster truck.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, and that becomes a whole nother game off of Pac-Man's mechanics, right? To wrap this up,
Ooh,
coming up to the end here, our wrap ups are always the same. We try to give advice to aspiring devs and students on the topic that we're speaking of, and then usually, if we have any, we try to give advice to the industry overall.
mhm.
Um, this one for me is pretty cut and dry. When it comes to story versus mechanics, I don't think anyone wins here. I think either or is gonna be your best bet, depending on what type of game you're trying to make. If it's narrative driven, clearly you're gonna want to start with the story first. Um, but if it's gameplay driven, then you may want to start with mechanics first because that makes more sense, and it's easy to do either and pivot and add story to make mechanics or to sell mechanics or make them make more sense to the game, and also to add mechanics to your story to sell the idea to the player while they're in the game. So I would say um, to aspiring devs, I would say don't think that you have to start with either or. If you're practicing and it's like, oh man, but I can't think of a game to make. Some of the best advice I've seen, even on LinkedIn, is like, just make as many features as you can, or mechanics. Just keep making game mechanics, and eventually you can turn that into a game. And the idea behind that advice, I'm assuming, because it's advice that I would give too, is that you can always turn it into a story later and make it into a game.
True.
Um,
Stories are flexible like that.
Conversely, right? So conversely, if you're a good writer, start with your story. Um, to the industry, I would say, man, let's keep a balance of this. I feel like we're becoming vastly imbalanced between game mechanics and story. And the games that we named, The Long Dark could have really been a great game. I think personally, the mechanics were really. I really felt like I was stranded out there. I really felt the weight of trying to make those decisions between, should I carry this pot, or should I carry this log, or should I carry this axe, or should I carry two axes because the axe gets dull and it might break, and all these different choices you had to make
Player choice is
that
important.
right that really sold the idea of surviving, but not enough story to keep me compelled. That whole, the bear chasing you like that, that's cool, and you gotta get the spear to. That's fine, but and I get it. You had to go. I forgot why he went there. I think he was flying. Was it his ex girlfriend somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, and then they crashed? It's
You
been a while
asking
since
me
I.
to remember a story of a game I played for like 4 hours a couple years ago. I couldn't tell you because I
Right?
can't remember.
And that was really just to set you up, right? You get a nice introduction that gives you, setting and everything. You get placed in the environment, and then once you drop in there, man, that story is far and few. You have a hard time keeping up with what the story is because there's really no story except that you're trying to survive this thing, and that's cool. But there's nothing tying me into wanting to continue. Um, I can understand if you're an explorer why you would like that, but for me, there was just nothing there. So let's keep a balance. Let's remember, we have to have reasons for the player to continue doing the things that we want them to do in the game, and that's where story comes in. But then, as dusk falls, like I don't want a graphic novel. Don't sit here and give me a pure movie where it's literally a Goosebumps book. Once again, turn to page 37 if you want to go into this door, but turn to page 45 if you. That's not a game, man. That's not a game.
Alright, so for me, for the aspiring devs, when it comes to story and mechanics, this is gonna be coming out of left field, but document everything. Just write down everything. If you have a thought that comes in your head, whether you think you're gonna remember it or not, write it down anyways. Write it down. Because if you're gonna be working on a game, it's good to document your thought. Put it on a scrap piece of paper, write it down on a notepad, type it out. Just get into a habit of just writing down your stuff. It helps in the long term because I've been working on some things and I'll be driving and I'll be thinking about something and I just could not remember it later. Start writing stuff down. Start doing that. Like, you think you just came up with an amazing story, you got a new twist to a concept, write it down. You got an idea for a game mechanic you're trying to work on, you just gotta really work out those ideas, write it down. Just get into the habit of just writing stuff down. That's just for like aspiring devs or people out there that want to do things. Trust me, it sounds repetitive and stupid now, but once you get into a habit of it, you'll never be without your ideas. Just get into the habit of doing that. Now, for the industry, I'm gonna say, again, out of left field, double down on your creative ideas. Like, I like what you guys have been doing when you guys are like, oh, I want to make a mechanic heavy game or a story heavy game. I'm here for all of that. Just keep making it. I'm all about it. The industry has a lot of work it can do, but I like what you're doing sometimes. And when you guys hit, ooh, it's it's so good. So unlike my esteemed colleague here who's not looking forward to story-based games where it's like you're not doing much, I'm cool with it. I like it. I'm a heavy story guy. Love story, always will love story. So if you want to give me a story experience, I'm here for it. So for the advice for the industry, trust your gut. Keep going. Except for EA. You need to stop with the whole hating single player games and stop playing with that. EA, you got potential. Don't mess this up. But that's pretty much it for me. And Bandersnatch was a video game done on Netflix.
Yeah, if you're not Square Enix or you're not Telltale, I'm not really checking for your story-based interactive games because
Japan has some of the
as
best
of
stories.
right now, it seems like we're going into a place where games are just becoming really lackluster. That like I said, I'm really not a fan of the As Dust Falls. Don't give me concept art with a few interactions here and there. I deserve a full game.
You deserve a full,
But
but that's on pricey
that's
for me. Like, don't
yeah.
put a $60 price tag on this. Nah.
Yeah, no, it's free
Price
on
it
Xbox
fairly.
Game Pass, so it's cool. But it just for me that wasn't a game that I enjoyed playing or even watching someone play, playing it myself. Like both experiences were like, what it looked like is what it felt like when I played.
Okay.
Um, so this has been our show.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much, whoever made it all the way to the end. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, join the gang. I see you, your hands on the mouse, you're thinking about it.
Just
Just
do
do
it.
it.
Just don't even think about it. Just do it. It's right, bro.
Just do it.
It's right there.
Just do
It's
it.
right there. Took you 2 seconds. And you know what? I even make your point. If you don't like our episodes, unsubscribe later. Subscribe now. Unsubscribe later. You ain't gonna unsubscribe because you like our stuff. I know you like it.
Yeah,
So go ahead and just hit that subscribe button. Makes you feel
make it
good, don't
happen.
it? Makes me feel good.
Make it happen, man. That's really it. Once
Yeah.
again, thank everybody for turning out. Thank you for everyone that has been sharing and commenting and reaching out in DMs or however you've been reaching out. I definitely feel the love from here. I definitely want to thank everyone. And yeah, we're this is a wrap, man. This is a
That's
wrap,
it.
wrap, wrap.
All right. Well,
So
appreciate you. Peace.